Hi friends, and welcome back to my channel. Today we continue speaking about conditional sentences, in particular about conjunctions that we can use instead of if to introduce conditional clauses. I've prepared lots of examples from literature for this class, both modern and classic, of different genres, and I hope this lesson will not only be useful, but also interesting. Let us start! Conjunctions used in conditional clauses. Before we start speaking about those particular conjunctions that we can use in subordinate conditional clauses, let's discuss what a conjunction is. In grammar, a conjunction is a word used to connect clauses or sentences. Conjunctions are those little words that glue clauses together and help us combine ideas in one sentence. And since, but, for are just some examples of conjunctions, there are plenty of them in the language. Conjunctions can consist of one or several words and are generally divided into two types: coordinating conjunctions and subordinating conjunctions. Coordinating conjunctions join independent clauses, clauses that have the same grammatical value. A compound sentence composed of such clauses can be easily divided into 2 or 3 simple sentences. For example, he wanted a hot drink, but all the cafes in the town were closed. Or, they told me it was crazy, but I did it anyway. Such sentences can be easily split into 2 halves, as you see. If coordinating conjunctions join clauses that have the same grammatical value, the subordinating conjunctions join clauses that have different grammatical value. Subordinating conjunctions are links between 2 clauses of a complex sentence where one of the clauses is an independent clause and the other clause is a dependent clause or a subordinate clause. Examples of such sentences are: I will never speak to you if you don't apologize. Or, she was late because she had missed her train. If you don't apologize is a subordinate conditional clause, and because she had missed her train is the subordinate clause of reason. There are different types of subordinate clauses, and consequently there are different types of subordinating conjunctions. We have conjunctions of time, place, condition, concession, comparison, and so on and so forth. Today we'll be speaking about a particular type of subordinating conjunctions: conditional conjunctions. These are conjunctions that introduce conditional clauses. There are, let's say, purely conditional conjunctions, those that introduce only conditional clauses like if, provided that, but for, and those that can introduce both subordinate conditional clauses and subordinate clauses of time. They are when, once, as long as, and some others. The latter, though, can be used in conditional sentences of types 0 and 1, of those that are in the indicative mood. Why? Because they introduce facts, things that always happen. In the sentences, as you know, we speak about certainty, not about probability. Let's compare 2 pairs of examples. As long as you stay in the city, you won't need a bigger car. I didn't see a single foreign car as long as I stayed there. The first sentence contains a subordinate conditional clause. As long as you stay in the city, you won't need a bigger car. What do we see here? We see as long as that can be replaced with if. If you stay in the city, you won't need a bigger car. In the second sentence, though, as long as introduces a different subordinate clause. I didn't see a single foreign car during my stay, or while I was staying there, right? We are speaking about a period of time, so this is a subordinate clause of time, not of condition. Once you apologize, she'll speak to you again. Once she's out in the sun, she puts on a hat and a pair of sunglasses. Once she took off her sunglasses, I recognized her. In the first sentence, we can replace once with if. If you apologize, she'll speak to you again. In the second sentence, we can do the same. We can say, if she's out in the sun, she puts on a hat and a pair of sunglasses. Zero conditional. So every time she is out there in the sun, she does this and that. It's certainty, yeah? It's not a probability. But the last sentence, once she took off her sunglasses, I recognized her, tells us something different, yeah? When she took off her sunglasses, I recognized her. We are not talking about a condition here, we are talking about a point in time. Our task today is to familiarize ourselves with all the words that can be used instead of if in conditional sentences. We'll start with condition conjunctions, those that can only introduce conditional clauses like if, for example, and then we'll look at those that can be used both to introduce the adverbial clauses of time and conditional clauses. And we will start with if and several conjunctions that contain if. Because how can we do without this teeny tiny but very important word when dealing with conditional sentences? If there is anything I dislike, it's the violin, she answered. Why one should want to hear anyone scrape the hairs of a horse's tail against the guts of a dead cat is something I shall never understand. These sentences are taken from Up at the Villa by Somerset Maugham. If you will have the kindness to hold the lamp for me, I shall now extend our searches to the room above, the secret room in which the treasure was found. From The Sign of the Four by Arthur Conan Doyle. And that was another one of Carol Silver's rules. Never take the elevator if you can take the stairs, and you'll never have to work out a day in your life. From One Italian Summer by Rebecca Searle. If is the most popular word in conditional sentences. And you see that the first two examples begin with conditional clauses, while in the third sentence it appears at the end of the sentence. You remember that we don't need a comma in front of such a clause if the main clause goes first. Other conjunctions commonly used in conditional sentences are if only and only if. Though they sound similar, they have different meaning. If only is a conjunction that contains two words and one of them is if. As I have already said, conjunctions can contain several words, even more than two. It's not necessarily one word. Typically, if only is used in simple sentences, in exclamations, and is used to express wishes and regrets. But sometimes it can introduce a clause in a complex sentence. Let's look at some examples. How wildly improbable success had seemed. If only Tuppence could have been at his side to share in the triumphant conclusion of their joint venture. If only I could be certain that I was not being overlooked. I looked carefully around the walls. There didn't seem to be a peephole of any kind. Nevertheless, I felt kind of sure there must be. If only I could succeed in carrying the bluff through, it might save me. I said a prayer, I drew a long breath, then I opened my eyes and started babbling in French. These sentences were taken from The Secret Adversary by Agatha Christie. And as you can see, things that are introduced by if only mostly regrets. Let's look at some more examples. Oh, if only the candles had been brighter. If only I had dared to light a torch. But I had the eyes of a blood drinker, didn't I? Why complain? He was planted there, looking up at me in his fury, and then it occurred to me to give him a small warning, if only I could do it. And I meant to try. Oh, if only I could remember all they told me, but they warned me that I would forget. Again, what do we see? We see desperation, yeah? We see regret, we see the speaker's wish to change something. If only is much more emotional, of course, than if. And I cannot say that they are interchangeable, of course not. Now let's look at a little bit different example where if only has a somewhat different meaning. "You're in my debt," he said softly. "Tell me what you are, if only so that I may know if I've lost my soul by serving you." As you can see, if only has a different meaning here. It means even if for no other reason than. Tell me what you are, even if for no other reason than for me to know if I've lost my soul. These examples were taken from Blood and Gold by Anne Rice, and I personally think that this great author is somewhat underestimated, at least outside the United States. She's definitely an outstanding writer. And if you haven't heard about her, I do recommend that you Google some of her books. As far as I know, she mostly writes fiction, but if I'm not mistaken, she also writes non-fiction. So we've discussed if only. Now let's talk about only if. I have a job only if I pass the bar exam, which at this moment seems impossible. When the room was paid for, a phone call would be allowed, but only if its charges were prepaid. These examples were taken from The Rooster Bar by John Grisham, the author of The Firm. What do we see here? Only if means only in case of, or never except in this particular situation. More examples. Understand, the payment in question was not a matter of money. It was that one had to be interested to be admitted to this woman's company. Poems had to be lyrical and meaningful. There had to be wit in conversation. One could play the virginal or the lute only if one knew how. And one more. I shall find her, and only if she answers against me will I let her go, will I let her remain with this mysterious companion. These examples were also taken from Blood and Gold by Anne Rice. Let's take a closer look at the last one. I shall find her, and only if she swears against me will I let her go. The sentence contains inversion. Will I let her go? Yeah, this clause is inverted. And the next one is to. Will I let her remain with my mysterious companion? I will do that only on condition that, yeah? Okay. Another conjunction containing if is even if. It has a synonym, even though. We use these conjunctions to stress that something will happen despite something else that might prevent it. Let's see. Alma was the sort of person who was born to investigate things regardless of the consequences, even if it meant breaking a lock. From The Signature of All Things by Elizabeth Gilbert. Another example, I usually bring 2 or 3 books with me on a trip. Even if they don't get read, I leave them behind. From One Italian Summer by Rebecca Searle. More examples, and this will be from Harry Potter. Couldn't you do something about it, Dumbledore? Even if I could, I wouldn't. Scars can come in useful. I have one myself above my left knee, which is a perfect map of the London Underground. The blood of a unicorn will keep you alive, even if you are an inch from death, but at a terrible price. You have slain something pure and defenseless to save yourself, and you will have but a half-life, a cursed life, from the moment the blood touches your lips. I'm sure the majority of you know these quotes and like the books. These particular sentences were taken from Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by J.K. Rowling. Another conjunction is provided that. Now we can see this conjunction in 2 different forms. We can say provided that or providing that. That can also be omitted. Let's see. I don't mind waiting in the carriage at all, provided there is somebody to look at me. In this particular case, that is missing. It's from An Ideal Husband by Oscar Wilde. And Smoke immediately wrote out the document wherein Wilde agreed to take every egg delivered to him at $10 per egg, provided that the 2 dozen advanced to him brought about a reconciliation with Lucille Errol. That's from Smoke Bellew by Jack London. Of course, provided that is a little bit more formal than if. You will more often see it written in books and in documents than used in everyday communication. Of course, it depends on who you communicate with. Okay, the synonym of provided that is on condition that, and that structure is even more formal, right? This way or another, we use provided that to say that something will only happen if a particular condition is met. Okay, let's go to the next one, which is given that, which means assuming that, taking something into consideration. Let's see. To begin with, Giovanni is 10 years younger than I am, and like most Italian guys in their 20s, he still lives with his mother. These facts alone make him an unlikely romantic partner for me, given that I'm a professional American woman in my mid-30s who has just come through a failed marriage and a devastating, interminable divorce, followed immediately by a passionate love affair that ended in sickening heartbreak. But if you ask a Catholic from Calabria to make the same commitment, he will only shrug, turn his eyes to God, and ask, "How can any of us know whether we will be free for dinner next Thursday night, given that everything is in God's hands and none of us can know our fate?" These examples were taken from Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. Let's look at some more examples with the same conjunction. But Lucy would know, and she alone would live with her knowledge. Given that there was no way of going back in time to do things differently, eternal guilt and isolation seemed like a fitting punishment. From The Clockmaker's Daughter by Kate Morton. You see, the sentences in this particular example are somewhat broken, yeah? The author does it with the purpose of evoking particular emotions from the readers. So given that starts a new sentence here, though actually it's not a full complex sentence here, but it's a clause. Okay, now let's talk about one of the most intriguing conjunctions that we can see in the conditional sentences and the subjunctive mood, and this is lest. Lest, as you already know if you have seen my videos on the subjunctive mood and conditionals, means in order not to. So it contains this negative component not. Never forget about it. We often use lest with expression denoting fear. For example, I want to write it down lest I forget, for fear that I will forget. If we do something lest something else happen, we do it to prevent it from happening or to avoid it. Let's look at several examples I've taken from another book by Anne Rice. I covered my blue eyes, as always, with black glasses, lest their radiance mesmerize and entrance at random, a real nuisance, and over my delicate white hands, with their telltale glassy fingernails, I drew the usual pair of soft grey leather gloves. From The Tale of the Body Thief by Anne Rice. Lest I attract notice, I moved forward and far off to the left, into the depth of the shadows, where perhaps a European traveller, clad in rich fur, might not be noticed, for, after all, fine fur was one thing they did indeed seem to have. From The Vampire Armand by Anne Rice. Our lest in these two sentences is used with the subjunctive mood, lest their radiance mesmerize, or lest their radiance entrance. So we don't say lest it mesmerizes, yeah, because mesmerizes would be the indicative mood and we want the subjunctive mood. If you haven't seen my video on the subjunctive mood, please follow the link in the description to this video and watch it, because there I explain everything you need to know about the subjunctive mood. So the same situation we have in the second example, lest I attract notice. The subjunctive mood is used. We must use the subjunctive mood after lest. And once again, I remind you that lest has this negative component not in what it expresses, so that's why our predicates are in the positive form. So you can paraphrase this sentence using in order not to, yeah, or for them not to. For example, I covered my blue eyes, as always, with black glasses, so that their radiance doesn't mesmerize and entrance at random. The indicative mood, of course, will be used in this case. The same, lest I attract notice, I moved forward and off to the left. In order not to attract notice, I moved forward and far off to the left. She saw her in ideal settled in that very house, in all the felicity which a marriage of true affection could bestow, and she felt capable, under such circumstances, of endeavoring even to like Melis to sisters. Her mother's thoughts, she plainly saw, were bent the same way, and she determined not to venture near her, lest she might hear too much. This passage was taken from Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. He was talking, apparently to someone, but I was afraid to go near enough to hear what he was saying, lest I might frighten him, lest he should run off. And the last one. We closed the door behind us, lest when we should have lit our lamps, we should possibly attract attention from the road. The professor carefully tried the lock, lest we might not be able to open it from within, should we be in a hurry making our exit. This sentence is from Dracula by Bram Stoker. Pay attention that the analytical subjunctive is used in these clauses with last here, and the very last clause is inverted. Should we be in a hurry making our exit? Yeah? If we are in a hurry, or should we be in a hurry? Again, I spoke about this type of inversion in the video on conditional sentences. Yeah, you can invert some types of conditional sentences. Check that video, please, if you're interested. Now, unless. Unless means except on the condition that. It is used to introduce the only circumstance or the only situation in which the event you're talking about is possible. For example, I'm a thief in every respect. I don't enjoy something unless I bargain for it, trick someone out of it, or steal it. The Tale of the Body Thief by Anne Rice. Exactly why Dudley wanted a racing bike was a mystery to Harry, as Dudley was very fat and hated exercise, unless of course it involved punching somebody. Then there were doors that wouldn't open unless he asked politely, or tickled them in exactly the right place, and doors that weren't really doors at all, but solid walls just pretending. It's the description of Hogwarts, right? From Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by Joanne Rowling. A lot of people talk about art, but you don't often find them paying out hard cash unless they are going to get something out of it for themselves. From Theatre by William Somerset Maugham. But that, of course, would only make the evil part of him angrier in the end, unless it could be conquered, unless it could be cured. Unless the weather changes once more and cheats us, we shall have a good chance of slipping through, unseen by any eyes on the eastern shore. The Fellowship of the Ring by John Tolkien. Again, I invite you to pay attention to the forms of the verbs used after unless they are going to get something out of it for themselves, yeah? Not unless they are not going. That would be incorrect. Unless they are going, because unless already has this negative component, the negative prefix un, yeah? In the second example, unless it could become conquered. Not unless it couldn't, yeah? And so on and so forth. There is another conjunction in English which seems to be similar but has a different meaning and looks somewhat weird because it has two negative components in it, and it's not unless. Not unless means only if. I will not go, said Boromir. Not unless the vote of the whole company is against me. I will only go if the vote of the whole company is against me. Then the eye began to rove, searching this way and that, and frauding you with certainty and horror, that among the many things that it sought, he himself was one. But he also knew that it could not see him, not yet, not unless he willed it. So the eye could only see Frodo if he willed it. From The Fellowship of the Ring by John Tolkien. Typically, in everyday life, we use not unless in response to something. For example, do we really have to go to this party? Not unless you want to. Not unless is a little bit emphatic, yeah? So you use it to make your answer more emphatic than it would be otherwise if you said only if you want to, for example. But for is used to introduce a particular thing that causes something to happen or makes something possible. There is a structure in the language that sounds like if it were not for or if it had been not for. For example, if it were not for you, we wouldn't do this or that. If it hadn't been for your help, we wouldn't have finished so early. Or, but for your help, we wouldn't have finished so early. But for can be followed by just a noun or a pronoun like but for you, but also it can be followed by a full clause. Let's see. His admiration was certainly very warm, yet she thought, but for Mrs. Weston, it would not have struck her. And that you should have been so mistaken is amazing. I'm sure, but for believing that you entirely approved and meant to encourage me in my attachment, I should have considered it at first too great a presumption almost to dare to think of him. If it weren't for believing in it, the belief that you entirely approved and meant to encourage me in my attachment was the only reason I didn't consider it at first too great a presumption, right? So that's a complicated sentence. It's from Emma by Jane Austen, but it perfectly illustrates that but for can introduce not only one word, but a whole clause, like this one, yeah? And my search would have been in vain, but for the help that I had from a friend, Aragorn, the greatest traveler and huntsman of this age of the world. If it hadn't been for his help, my search would have been in vain. That is what the sentence means. And it was taken from The Fellowship of the Ring by John Tolkien. In case is a conjunction that can be used in two different ways. We can use it as a synonym of if, like in case he comes, give him this letter, for example. This sentence will mean the same thing as if he comes, give him this letter. But it can also be used to express a precaution against something that might happen, like wear rubber pants in case you cut the cord. That doesn't mean that we expect that to happen, but just in case something like this happens, something else should be done, like a precaution, right? Let's see. My friend Nick asked, why are you studying Italian? So that just in case Italy ever invades Ethiopia again and is actually successful this time, you can brag about knowing a language that's spoken in 2 whole countries. That's from Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. And I wrote down everything about her day, her likes and dislikes, in case she quizzes me. I am a great husband because I'm very afraid she may kill me. That's from Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. So just to be on the safe side, that's what in case means. Let's move to the next one, supposing, and we will differentiate between the conjunction supposing and the verb to suppose. Both are used in conditional clauses. If nobody knew, you might marry Miss Lytton Gore without telling her the truth. But supposing one person knew, a friend who had known you all your life. Let's imagine one person knew, right? Madam was at the house party and we girls sat among ourselves, just laughing, Well, we said, supposing Madam did him in, out of revenge, Let us suppose, let us imagine such a situation. 3-act tragedy by Agatha Christie. This is how we use the word supposing, which is a conjunction. Now let's look at suppose, which is a verb. But suppose I also told what had happened to me in John Coffey's cell. Aunt Harriet was too old. She wouldn't understand Mr. Jingle's frisky ways. And suppose Mr. Jingles outlived her. What would happen to him then? No, Aunt Hermione just wouldn't do. Well, then I asked, suppose one of us took it, one of us guards. We could keep him right here on E-block. No, Delacroix said he thanked me kindly for the thought certain meant, but Mr. Jingles was a mouse that yearned to be free. He, Edward Delacroix, knew this because Mr. Jingles had, you guessed it, whispered the information in his ear. Some of you might have recognized this passage. It's from The Green Mile by Stephen King. Now, on condition that Intesa Sanpaolo, Italy's best capitalized large bank, said last week it was open to purchasing the rump of the good assets for €1 on condition that Italy's government pass a decree agreeing to shoulder the cost of winding down the two banks. From Reuters.com, Mr. Stapleton offered me marriage on condition that I could obtain a divorce from my husband. It's from Sherlock Holmes Returns, and it's a movie. Since can function as a conjunction, as an adverb of time, and as a preposition, but we are only interested today in how we can use it in conditional sentences. In conditional sentences, it can be used synonymously to if. Let's look at these examples. What do you mean? Asked Heathcliff. And what are you doing? Lie down and finish out the night, since you are here. But for heaven's sake, don't repeat that horrid noise. Nothing can excuse it unless you are having your throat cut. As you can see, we can replace since with if in this sentence, and the idea will be the same. If you are here, you lie down and finish out the night if you are here. I persuaded him easily to let me lay the blame of his bruises on the horse. He minded little what tale was told, since he had what he wanted. He complained so seldom indeed of such stirs as these, that I really thought him not vindictive. I was deceived completely, as you will hear. Again, let's try to replace since with if in this sentence. He minded little what tale was told if he had what he wanted. To be sure, considering the exhibition you performed in his presence this afternoon, I might say it would be wise to refuse him. Since he asked you after that, he must either be hopelessly stupid or a venturesome fool. These examples were taken from Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. And in all of them we can see that since is used synonymously to if, as long as another conjunction that can introduce both conditional clauses and adverbial clauses of time. She will be taken good care of. As long as she stays there, it is all very well. I would go and see her if I could have the carriage. From Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Diana gave me a lock of her hair, and I'm going to sew it up in a little bag and wear it around my neck all my life. Please see that it is buried with me, for I don't believe I'll live very long. Perhaps when she sees me lying cold and dead before her, Mrs. Mary may feel remorse for what she has done and will let Diana come to my funeral. I don't think there is much fear of your dying of grief as long as you can talk, Anne, said Marilla unsympathetically. So these sentences were taken from Anne of Green Gables, a touching novel by Lucy Montgomery, which I believe is a must-read. So long as is a synonym of as long as. There is nothing wrong with using the phone if you have to, so long as you do it discreetly. Just limit yourself to actual needs. Unless you're counted on for around-the-clock instant access, letting your texts and emails go unanswered for a few hours should not be the end of the world. This passage I took from the blog post How to Network and Socialize Effectively, a comprehensive guide on www.artofmanliness.com. Just to show you an example with so long as. Both mean the same. So long as and as long as mean on condition that when in this particular situation, or if in this particular situation, then. Okay, let's proceed to once. Once can function in a sentence as a conjunction, as an adverb, as a noun, and an adjective. This word has different meanings, but today we'll be talking about once as a conjunction in conditional clauses. Just as the previous two conjunctions, once differs from if because it expresses no uncertainty. It just shows us a particular period of time at which something happens. That's why it is used only in those conditional sentences that are in the indicative mood. I upped my offer, even suggesting this different kind of 50-50 split. What if he took all the assets and I took all the blame? But not even that offer would bring a settlement. Now I was at a loss. How do you negotiate once you've offered everything? How do you negotiate if you have offered everything, and how do you negotiate when you have offered everything? So we are talking here about a situation that is more like a rule, right? Not a condition. Whoever the doer of the action is and whatever the situation is, if you offer everything, it is difficult to negotiate, or it is impossible to negotiate. Yeah, this is a general truth. It's not a subjunctive mood, it's the indicative mood, and once is synonymous to if in this situation. The sentence was taken from Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. Let's take a look at a different example. I wouldn't make a promise to you like that unless I meant it. I'll find out, and if they have survived, if they do have a community somewhere, then you can decide whether or not you want to meet with them. But once a meeting occurs, they'll know about you, what you are, everything. And this one, being a full-fledged vampire is a tough job once you've seen the streets of heaven and hell. These examples were taken from Blood Canticle by Anne Rice. These two sentences speak about something inevitable, a certainty, and the indicative mood is used. Your decision whether to use if or once depends on what kind of situation you're talking about. Is it something that happens always, 100%, or is it something that may happen on a very particular condition? If you know that this thing happens and will happen in this particular situation, you can use once. But if you're talking about something that you're not sure about and something that can change, from situation to situation, in this case, if is better because if expresses less certainty. Similarly, when can be used in conditional sentences of 0 and the first types. When introduces clauses that speak about certainty, not about probability. If you want probability, you use if. Let's see. When you're traveling in India, especially through holy sites and ashrams, you see a lot of people wearing beads around their necks. In desperate love, we always invent the characters of our partners, demanding that they be what we need of them, and then feeling devastated when they refuse to perform the role we created in the first place. I'm the kind of person who, when a 9th-generation Indonesian medicine man tells you that you're destined to move to Bali and live with him for 4 months, thinks you should make every effort to do that. I think you probably have already guessed that these examples were taken from Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. As you can see, we can use if in all of these sentences, in all of these clauses, but we use when because they express some general truths, things that are always true, some certainties. When you're traveling in India, but if you're traveling in India is also possible. Feeling devastated when they refuse to perform the role we created in the first place can be paraphrased into feeling devastated if they refuse to perform the role we created in the first place. But I hope you feel this difference. If expresses less certainty. It's about probabilities and not about facts, not about recurrent situations, right? And the last conjunction we'll be talking about today is until. Until can also be used in conditional clauses. Let's see in which cases. I will take everybody at their word until I have reason not to anymore. Until there is any evidence to the contrary, there is no reason to believe he had anything to do with it. If there is no evidence to the contrary, there is no reason to believe he had anything to do with it. Until can function as an adverb, until can introduce adverbial clauses of time, but it also can be used in conditional clauses like these. These examples were taken from the corpus of contemporary American English. Okay, my task today was to provide you with examples of different conjunctions that are used in conditional subordinate clauses to show you what other words apart from if we can use to introduce such clauses. I hope you found this video useful and interesting, and I also hope that those examples inspired you to read something in English. If you have any questions to me, please leave them down below. Subscribe to this channel if you're interested in what I'm doing here, and see you in the next lesson.